The first thing we are going to program with ActionScript is called a trace statement. A trace statement doesn't have any practical purpose as far as what the viewer is going to see with your program. What a trace statement does is it allows us to test code and output a message into the output window. So that way, when we're testing, we can see if code was successfully typed out, and we can test other aspects of our program by using a simple trace statement. So to begin, we will just make a new ActionScript 3.0 document. We'll be, of course, focusing in on these two later on, but for right now, for testing, we can just use the default ActionScript 3.0 document. So go ahead and click on that and launch your new document. First, we're going to need to make an actions layer or keyframe, and we will just come down here to layer 1 and double click and rename this actions. And that's just a good practice to have, especially when you have a lot going on your document, if you have a lot of visual aspects occurring. So now we will click on the first frame of that layer because we are going to place the code on that frame. Whenever you do ActionScript, you need to place it on a frame. This is different from ActionScript 2.0, which allowed us to place it on objects and the like, but from here we're doing it on a frame. So now go up to Window and Actions. So now we have the Actions panel. So I'll just reduce the size of this a bit. And in order to create a trace statement, we first need to type out the word trace. So as I start typing, you'll notice that the text is black, and that's because it's just defining it as just regular text right now. It's not seeing this as anything special, basically. But as I put in the word trace, you can see my color changes to blue. That's indicating that this is something that Flash recognizes, that this is a command, or this is, a class, or whatever it is that you're typing out. So that will give you an indication if you've typed out a command or a function that Flash will recognize. So once we have that written out, we'll make a space and we'll put a parentheses. Now you'll notice as we do this, Flash is really good at giving us helpful tips, because when we put in the parentheses, you can see that it has ... parameters. And this is basically saying, okay, so you are now creating a trace statement. So now you want to put your parameters in the trace statement. Well, with trace statements, we are simply writing out text to appear in the output window. Since we're creating a message, we're going to want some quotation marks. So we will put a quotation mark, and I will write out, this is a trace statement. And then another quotation mark. And of course, we need to close this off. And that's also indicated by this helpful little hint here. It's closing it off. So we will close off this parentheses. And finally, in order to close off your statement, in order for it to be successful, in order for it to be a complete statement, we need to enter in a semicolon. So just enter in a semicolon like that, and now the statement is complete. Now, if we were to not have a semicolon, and if you click on this check mark icon, this checks your syntax. Oh, I guess that doesn't give me an error. Let me try this. There we go. So if I were to not complete the statement and I were to check the syntax, this basically checks to see if everything's typed out correctly. You can see that it gives you an error. It's saying on line 2, there's an error. It's expecting a right parentheses before the end of the program. And that's pretty easy to decipher. When you get into more complex programs and you type something out and it doesn't work correctly, then you kind of have an issue where it's, okay, where do I go to fix this? But in this case, it's pretty self-explanatory, and we also want that semicolon at the end. So now we are clear at the bottom. Okay, so now what we can do is test this out to see if it works. We can go to Control, Test Movie, and in this case, we'll be testing in Flash Professional. And then we can just click that or click Test or Control Enter in this case. You can see nothing appears on my stage. However, in the bottom here, we have the trace statement. This is a trace statement. So that indicates that the trace statement worked, and we have successfully programmed our first piece of ActionScript. Yay, aren't you excited? Of course, we'll be getting into much more complex stuff, but it's always good to start with a trace statement. Okay, from here you could, of course, come back in here and edit the trace statement if you wish. You could, rename it to hello, and you could test the movie, and of course it'll keep the changes. So you can play with that in the meantime. In the next lesson, we will add a little bit more complexity and continue to build on the basics of ActionScript.